My name is Clara Monroe, and for as long as I can remember, I have been the family archivist. It wasn't an official title, of course, but a role I settled into as naturally as dust settles on old books. My life has been one of quiet order, of cataloging and preserving. By profession, I work in the rare manuscripts division of a university library, a world of acid-free paper, controlled humidity, and the hushed reverence for stories that have survived the ages. At home, I was the keeper of memories, the planner of events, the silent facilitator who ensured the narrative of the Monroe family ran smoothly. I was the one who remembered birthdays, booked the flights, and kept the digital photo albums neatly tagged and organized. I was the invisible ink that held the words together. 2 weeks ago, I stood at the check-in counter at Charleston International Airport, a folder of meticulously printed documents in my hand, and received a text from my father that read, "Plans changed. Have a good week," followed by a laughing emoji. As I watched my parents, my brother, and my sister glide through security without a backward glance, leaving me alone with my luggage and the shattered expectations of a trip to Tuscany I had single-handedly funded, I thought that was the deepest cut. But I was wrong. The real wound wasn't a single, sharp betrayal. It was a long, slow infection, one that had been festering for years in the ledgers of my bank account, in the fine print of contracts I never signed, and in the comfortable, convenient space they had carved out for me in their lives. A space that looked less like a daughter and more like a utility. How do you heal from a family that never raised their voice against you, but simply, quietly wrote you out of your own life story? The air in the airport that morning was a familiar blend of floor polish, jet fuel, and the faint, sweet scent of Cinnabon wafting from the food court. It was a chaos I found comforting, a prelude to the meticulously planned piece of our vacation. I had spent 6 months arranging this trip to Tuscany, a gift for my parents' 30th anniversary. It was meant to be a masterpiece of planning, a perfect memory I could curate and add to our family's collection. Beside the baggage drop, my mother, Catherine, was already directing my sister, Sophie, into the perfect lighting for a pre-flight selfie. "Chin down, darling," she murmured, her voice a smooth melody of practiced perfection. Sophie, the golden one, complied with a dazzling smile. My brother, Nate, ever the cool observer, lounged against a pillar, thumbs flying across his phone, a faint, detached amusement on his face. My father, Richard, gestured impatiently toward my luggage cart without meeting my eyes. "Clara, the bags. Let's not hold up the line." "Of course," I said softly, pushing the cart forward. It was my natural state, anticipating needs, smoothing edges, making things easy. The overtime I'd worked to cover the villa's security deposit, the freelance archival work I'd taken on to pay for their business class upgrades, the delicate negotiation with Nate's university over his perpetually late tuition. These were the silent contributions, the footnotes to our family story that were never read aloud. They were simply expected, the cost of my place at the table. At the counter, I smiled warmly at the agent, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Linda. I handed her my passport. She scanned it, and a small frown line appeared between her brows. She typed something, her fingers clicking a soft, staccato rhythm on the keyboard. She tried again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic whisper. "I don't have a reservation under this name for the flight to Rome." A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed through me. That can't be right. I'm with them. I gestured over my shoulder to my family, who were now pretending to be engrossed in a conversation a few feet away. "The Monroe party." Linda shook her head, her expression apologetic. "I have a Richard, a Catherine, a Nate, and a Sophie Monroe. But there's no Clara." My breath caught in my throat. I turned to my father, the question forming on my lips, but he was already looking at his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. My own phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the text from him. "Plans changed. Have a good week." I read it once, then a second time, the words blurring. A joke. It had to be a cruel, elaborate joke. I looked at my mother, searching for a sign, an explanation. She was stifling a giggle behind her hand, her eyes sparkling with a mirth that felt like acid. Nate let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh man, you should see your face," he said, pulling out his phone to take a picture. I didn't move. My body had turned to stone, a statue in the middle of the bustling terminal. Behind me, a man cleared his throat, annoyed. A child's voice piped up, "Mommy, why is that lady so sad?" I wasn't crying. Not yet. The shock was a dam holding back the flood. Richard finally stepped closer, his voice low but carrying the full weight of his casual cruelty. "We figured you'd be happy to watch the house. Someone needs to water the plants. We'll send you a postcard," Sophie added, her voice dripping with faux sweetness as she sashayed past me, her designer carry-on swinging from her shoulder. They walked away, a perfect, self-contained unit, and disappeared into the security line. No wave, no final word, just the sight of my mother's perfectly coiffed hair shrinking in the distance. I stood there, rooted to the spot, until the pressure in my knees reminded me I was still standing. Slowly, mechanically, I turned my luggage cart and wheeled it toward the exit, toward the taxi stand. In the cab, the driver's concerned voice from the front seat was a distant hum. "Everything all right, miss?" I managed a nod, my voice a prisoner in my own throat. By the time I reached my small, quiet apartment, the Charleston humidity was already thick and heavy. I let myself in, the click of the lock echoing in the silence. My keys landed in the ceramic bowl by the door with a clatter that sounded unnaturally loud. The apartment felt alien, a place I had only been visiting. My gaze fell on the kitchen. A half-eaten container of Nate's favorite takeout was still in the fridge. On the refrigerator door, held by a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower from a previous trip I'd organized, was a note in my mother's elegant script. "Packages arriving for Sophie on Wednesday. Please don't let them get rained on like last time." I stared at the note. It had been there for 3 days. They had known. This wasn't a spontaneous, cruel prank at the airport. This was a calculated decision, a plan they had all agreed upon while I was busy finalizing their itinerary. They had packed their bags, knowing mine would be unpacked. They had smiled at me over breakfast, knowing they were leaving me behind. My phone buzzed again. A shared calendar notification. Monroe Family Tuscan Adventure, Day 1. Below it, a note from my mother. "Thanks for holding down the fort, C." Not Clara. Not even Honey. Just C. The way you'd initial a task on a chore list. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the nearest object against the wall. I walked with a strange, deliberate calm to my small living room, sat on the edge of my gray sofa, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed, casting a cool blue light on my face. For a long time, my hands hovered over the keyboard, motionless. If they could erase me from a trip, from a family portrait, maybe it was time I erased myself from their balance sheets. I didn't reply to the calendar alert. I didn't call and demand an explanation I knew I'd never receive. Instead, I began to move through my quiet apartment like an archivist examining a compromised collection, assessing the damage, and preparing for the long, painstaking work of restoration. The next morning, the sun streamed through the blinds, striping the floor in a pattern that reminded me of a cage. I made a pot of strong, black coffee and let it go cold on the counter as I paced the length of my small living room. The silence was a presence, thick and suffocating. Finally, I returned to my laptop. On the screen was a blank document I had created the night before, titled simply, "The Record." I wasn't sure where to begin. The sheer volume of my silent contributions felt like an ocean, and I was trying to measure it with a teaspoon. So I started with the most recent, the most tangible. I logged into my primary bank account. The numbers on the screen, once a source of quiet pride in my stability, now felt like a testament to my naivety. There were the tuition transfers to Nate's university. I'd agreed to help him finish his degree after he'd switched majors for the 3rd time, but the amounts had quietly doubled over the last semester. He'd told me it was for lab fees. Now, I wondered. Then, the monthly charge for my father's membership at the Riverwood Golf Club. I'd offered to cover it 1 year when his business had a slow quarter. That was 5 years ago. The payments were still being automatically deducted. Charges from Le Salon Chic, Sophie's favorite hair salon. I'd paid for a cut and color once as a birthday gift 2 years ago. It had become a recurring monthly expense, a silent subscription to her beauty regimen. No one had ever asked. It was simply assumed, my account a limitless resource they could tap at will, like a municipal water line. I scrolled further, my eyes scanning years of transactions. 2 entries, larger than the rest, made me pause. Oakstead Landscape and Design, final installment, $11,250. Amex Platinum Supplemental Card, R. Monroe Balance Transfer, $7,812. I had never authorized a landscaping project. I didn't own a house with a yard to landscape. I clicked on the transaction details. The invoice was for a bluestone patio and a water feature installed at my parents' address. The Amex account was even more chilling. I had never opened an American Express card in my life. I navigated to the card issuer's website, my hands trembling slightly as I used the forgot password feature, directing the reset link to my email. When I logged in, the statement was a map of their unacknowledged luxuries. Expensive dinners in the city, a weekend trip to a spa in Asheville for my mother and Sophie, new golf clubs for my father. All charged to a card with my name on it, a card I never knew existed. My inbox held another discovery. I searched my father's name, and an email from a major health insurance provider popped up. Subject: Your new supplemental plan details. My breath hitched. I clicked it open. There, in black and white, were the details of a premium health plan, with my name and social security number listed as the primary holder and Richard Monroe as the beneficiary. They hadn't just used my money, they had used my identity. I called the insurer's customer service line. A polite, detached voice confirmed my fears. Yes, Ms. Monroe, the policy was established with your information, with Mr. Richard Monroe designated as the primary user for claims. I thanked him and hung up, my body numb. I stared at the wall, at a framed print of a quiet, misty forest. It wasn't just the trip. It wasn't just the money. It was the calculated, systemic nature of it all. They weren't just taking from me, they were living through me, using my good credit, my clean record, my very identity as a resource to be exploited. And they had done it all with the casual confidence of people who believed they were entitled to it. I opened a drawer in my desk and pulled out a small, accordion file where I kept important receipts. Tucked inside was the invoice for the non-refundable deposit on the Tuscan villa. Primary guest, Catherine Monroe. Paid in full by C. Monroe. My hand shook as I held the paper. This wasn't about being forgotten. This was about being consumed. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a function. I stood up, the rage finally burning through the shock, lending me a strange, cold clarity. I returned to my laptop and opened the record. This time, I began to type. May 2024, Tuscan anniversary trip, villa, flights, excursions. Funded entirely by C. Monroe. Not invited. March 2024, Oakstead Landscape and Design. Unauthorized use of funds. Richard and Catherine Monroe. January 2024, American Express Platinum Card. Unauthorized account opening. Identity fraud. October 2023, Supplemental Health Insurance Policy. Unauthorized use of SSN. Identity fraud. I filled line after line, the list growing longer, a stark and damning chronicle of a decade of silent theft. I stopped after the 20th entry, not because I was finished, but because I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. I closed my eyes and whispered the truth into the empty room. They didn't just leave me behind. They were erasing me all along. That night, I didn't mourn the family I thought I had. I began preparing to confront the one I actually did. I walked over to my bookshelf, to a small, curated section of personal keepsakes. Tucked between a vintage copy of Jane Eyre and a box of old college photographs was a beautiful, linen-bound photo album. The spine was embossed with gold lettering, The Monroe Family, 30 Years of Memories. It was the anniversary gift I had planned to give them in Tuscany. I had spent weeks compiling it, carefully restoring old, faded photographs, writing captions in my neatest script, arranging them chronologically. It was a testament to my role, a physical manifestation of my love. I flipped through the pages. There was Nate on his first bicycle, me holding the back of the seat, my small face tense with concentration. There was Sophie at her ballet recital, a tiny ballerina in a cloud of pink tulle. There were my parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful. On nearly every page, I was either partially obscured, slightly out of focus, or missing entirely, the one behind the camera, the silent observer documenting everyone else's joy. I had even included scanned copies of letters from my grandmother, Rose, who used to call me her little anchor, the one who kept the family ship steady. I once thought it was a compliment. Now it just felt heavy. The final page was a blank, clear plastic sleeve. It was meant to hold the grand finale, a group photo of all of us at the villa in Tuscany, me handing them the album, our faces glowing in the Italian sun. That was the scene I had pictured for months. Then I remembered. The morning of the flight, I'd left the album on the hall table, ready to be packed in a carry-on. After they left, when I returned to my apartment, I realized I'd never seen anyone pick it up. On a hunch, I had driven to their house before coming to my own, using my key to let myself in. The house was silent and still. And there, on the hall table, shoved behind a stack of mail, was the album. They hadn't forgotten it. They had left it behind. They didn't want the memories I had so carefully preserved. Back in my apartment, I closed the album, the soft thud of the cover a sound of finality. My chest ached with a dull, persistent pain. It was the ache of a ghost realizing it was never truly seen. And then, a memory surfaced, not a flash, but a slow, creeping realization. My 12th birthday. I had asked for a simple party in the backyard with my 2 best friends and a chocolate cake with raspberry filling from our local bakery. My mother had agreed. But on the morning of my birthday, she told me there was a change of plans. Nate had a last-minute soccer tournament an hour away. "It's the semifinals, darling," she'd said, her hand briefly touching my shoulder. "You understand. Family supports family." I nodded, of course. We spent the day at a dusty sports complex. When we got home late that evening, exhausted and sunburned, there was no cake, no presents waiting. The day had simply been absorbed by Nate's needs. I remember sitting in my room, the silence a stark contrast to the cheering crowds from the afternoon, and understanding for the first time that my desires were secondary, conditional, easily erased. I learned to stop asking. I learned to become the quiet one, the easy one, the anchor. In the present, I slid the heavy album into the bottom drawer of my cedar chest and locked it. They didn't deserve my memories. I walked to the window and watched as a soft rain began to fall, tapping a gentle rhythm against the glass. It wasn't a dramatic storm, just a persistent, quiet cleansing. My phone lit up with another notification. Tuscan Adventure, 10 a.m. winery tour and tasting. They hadn't even bothered to remove me from the event invitations. I was still their default setting, even in my own exclusion. I pressed and held the notification and a small menu appeared. I tapped delete. "I'll give them a record they can't ignore," I whispered to my reflection in the rain-streaked window. I meant it, but intention is a seed, action is the water, and sun it needs to grow. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt foreign and frighteningly powerful. I was no longer just tending to the archives. I was deaccessioning a toxic collection. The drive to my parents' house was an exercise in muscle memory. Each turn, each familiar landmark, the old oak tree, the corner store with the faded awning, felt like a ghost from a past life. The sun was bright, the sky a brilliant, cloudless blue. Everything looked aggressively normal, which somehow made the situation feel more perverse. I parked in the driveway and used my key to unlock the front door. The air inside was cool and still, scented with my mother's signature vanilla potpourri. I stood in the entryway, listening. The house was utterly silent, a perfect museum of a life I was no longer part of. I walked into the living room, and my steps faltered. My blood ran cold. For years, the space above the fireplace mantel had been occupied by a large, framed photograph I had taken on our last family trip to the Outer Banks. It was a candid shot, all 5 of us squinting into the sun, wind-whipped and genuinely happy for a fleeting moment. I had paid for that trip, booked the house, and even remembered to pack the aloe vera for my father's inevitable sunburn. That photo was gone. In its place hung a new, professionally shot canvas. It was a studio portrait, sleek and sterile. Richard, Catherine, Nate, and Sophie, all dressed in coordinated shades of cream and beige, smiled serenely. The four of them. The space where I should have been was now just empty, neutral backdrop. They hadn't just taken down an old photo, they had replaced it with a version of the family that did not include me. They had curated me out of existence. I felt a strange wave of dizziness and gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. I walked slowly to the kitchen, my hand trailing along the cold granite countertop. Taped to the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator was a new note, this one on festive stationery. Monroe family, welcome home from Italy. Barbecue. Saturday at 4 p.m. All are welcome. Below was a list of names, neighbors, friends from the golf club, my mother's book club. My name was nowhere on the list. Not even with a scribbled, Clara, bring dessert, next to it. I pulled out my phone and opened our family group chat. It was still active. Nate had posted a picture of his gelato. Sophie had sent a boomerang of her and my mother clinking glasses of Prosecco. I stared at the screen at the cheerful, oblivious stream of messages. My thumb hovered over the screen, and then, with a single, decisive tap, I selected Leave Group. The phone remained silent. No immediate pop-up. No, Clara has left the chat. No frantic text from my mother asking what was wrong. Nothing. I wandered down the hall to the room that had once been mine. It was now a pristine guest room, decorated in tasteful, impersonal gray. The bookshelf that once held my childhood favorites was gone, replaced by a single, artfully placed orchid. My name, my scent, my history, all of it had been scrubbed clean. Back in the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and just stood there, listening to the silence. An hour passed. I checked my phone. Still nothing. 2 hours. I scrolled through work emails, answered a query from a student. 3 hours. They hadn't even noticed I was gone. I was never really here, I whispered, and the truth of it didn't sting. It settled, like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a lake. I walked to the front door, opened the small drawer in the antique entry table, and retrieved the spare key. I held it in my palm, the metal cool against my skin. Then I walked outside, down the bluestone path I had apparently paid for, and dropped it into the mailbox. The metallic clang of the flap closing sounded like a gavel. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left to see. The silence I had created didn't last long. I was barely back in the sanctuary of my apartment when my phone screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Aunt Helen. My mother's younger sister, the family black sheep, a free-spirited artist who had long ago opted out of the Monroe's carefully constructed world. I answered, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm. Clary Bear, she said, her voice warm and raspy, a welcome contrast to my mother's polished tones. Your mother called me. She's spinning some wild tale about you having a breakdown. Said you're being irrational. I figured I should get the real story. I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. Someone was asking for my version. I'm not having a breakdown, Aunt Helen, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm waking up. I thought so, she said with a sigh. Honey, what they did, it's been happening for a long time. I just don't think you were ready to see it. We talked for an hour. I told her everything, the airport, the photo, the credit card, the quiet, constant drain. She listened without interruption, her occasional murmurs of "oh, honey," and "that bastard" a balm on my raw nerves. Just as we were about to hang up, my phone beeped with an incoming call. My father. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a notification popped up. I steeled myself and pressed play. Clara. Richard's voice was laced with weary impatience, the tone he used when I was being difficult. This is all very dramatic. It was a joke that went too far, all right? You always take things so seriously. We love you, but you need to learn to lighten up. Now, call your mother. She's worried. Worried about what? I thought. Her image? The disruption to her perfect narrative? Each word was a tiny, precise hammer blow, attempting to chip away at my newfound resolve and reshape it into guilt. I saved the voicemail, labeling it Gaslighting 101. That night, I sat in the soft glow of a single lamp and returned to the record. I added more entries, tracing the financial threads back through the years. The down payment on Nate's first car. The emergency root canal for Sophie. The investment in my father's friend's failed startup. It was a tapestry of one-sided sacrifice. The total cost of their Tuscan vacation, I now realized, tallying up the receipts, was just over $22,000. Every flight, every meal, every bottle of Chianti, all of it paid for by me, the ghost at their feast. No wonder they could laugh. Their comfort was built on my silence. That was the unspoken contract, and I had been honoring it my entire life. I opened my voice memo app, not knowing what I would say. I just pressed record. My name is Clara Monroe, I began, my voice quiet but clear. I was taught that love is a form of service, and that family means you give until there's nothing left. So I gave. I paid for the trips, covered the tuition, co-signed the loans. I did it because I thought that's what a good daughter does. I paused, taking a breath. But the more I gave, the more invisible I became. They didn't thank me. They used me. And then they left me at an airport and laughed about it. I stopped the recording. I saved it, naming the file The Truth, Draft 1. It wasn't for them. It was for me. It was the first time I had ever spoken my story aloud, and it felt like drawing a clean, deep breath after years of holding it in. My phone buzzed. It was a notification that I'd been added to a new group chat. Monroe Core 4. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that startled me. They really thought a new chat group would fix this. They still hadn't noticed the missing key. They hadn't noticed my departure from their digital lives. They still expected me to show up at that barbecue, platter in hand, ready to resume my role. Let's see how they feel when the curtain falls, I whispered, turning my phone face down on the counter. This wasn't about asking for respect anymore. It was about taking back the life they had borrowed without permission. The next morning began not with a bang, but with a text message I wasn't supposed to see. At 8:15 a.m., a message from Nate buzzed on my phone. He had clearly sent it to me by mistake, meaning for it to go to Sophie. Don't worry about it. She's all bark, no bite. She'll get over it in a week and everything will go back to normal. She always does. She always does. I set the phone down on my desk as if it were radioactive. I didn't reply. I didn't feel rage. I felt a profound, chilling calm. They weren't just dismissing my pain, they were counting on my weakness, on my history of quiet compliance. They truly believed they had me figured out. All right, Nate, I said to the empty room. Let's test that theory. I opened my laptop. The first stop was the university's tuition portal. I found Nate's account, linked directly to my checking. With 3 clicks, I removed my payment information. In the memo box, I typed a short, professional note. Sponsorship for this account has been terminated. Please direct all future billing inquiries to the student or his primary guardian, Richard Monroe. Next, the health insurance provider. I logged in, found the policy with my social security number tethered to my father's name, and clicked Terminate Authorization. A confirmation screen popped up. Are you sure? I clicked yes, without a moment's hesitation. One by one, I went down the list. The shared family phone plan. The cloud storage account where my mother kept thousands of photos, the same photos they had cropped me out of. The various streaming services. The credit union account where I was a cosigner on a line of credit for Sophie. Click. Terminate. Click. Remove access. Click. Change password. I moved with the detached efficiency of a bomb disposal expert, severing every wire that connected their lives to mine. By noon, the digital umbilical cord was cut. And then, the fallout began. My phone started to buzz, a frantic, escalating rhythm. An email alert, tuition payment for Nate Monroe, declined. A text from the phone company, account change confirmation. An email from Netflix, there's a problem with your payment method. Nate texted first. Hey, my student account is locked? Weird glitch. Can you check it? I ignored it. Then Sophie. Clara, I can't get into the photo drive. Did you change the password? I need the pictures from the Hamptons for a post. I stared at the message. The pictures she needed were the ones I'd spent an entire weekend editing. I didn't reply. The family group chat, the New Monroe Core 41, started to light up with messages I could see in the notifications bar. What's going on? Is anyone else's phone acting weird? My card was just declined at the store. Finally, an email from my mother. Subject: urgent. The body of the email was just a single, panicked question. Clara, what have you done? I didn't answer. I stood up from my desk and made a cup of chamomile tea, my hands perfectly steady. I was letting them feel, for the first time, the true weight of my absence. Just as I was sitting down on my sofa, ready to savor the first sip of tea in my new, quiet world, the doorbell rang. A sharp, insistent peal. I froze. Through the peephole, I saw Sophie standing on my doorstep, her face a mask of furious indignation. On my doormat was a small, elegantly wrapped box. She must have seen me because she slapped a post-it note onto the box and jabbed the doorbell again. I didn't open the door. I waited until I heard her huff in frustration and her footsteps retreat down the hall. I opened the door just enough to retrieve the box. The post-it, in her perfect, looping script, read, "I thought you were more mature than this." Guess I was wrong. I didn't even bother to open the box. It was probably some peace offering, a trinket from Italy meant to smooth things over. I dropped it, note and all, directly into the trash can. The Whisper network activated that afternoon. The text messages started coming from extended family and old friends. Hey, your mom called, said you were going through something? Hope you're okay. An old high school friend saw Sophie's Insta story, something about toxic family members. Thinking of you. 3 people unfollowed me on social media. They were building their narrative, painting me as unstable, ungrateful, the villain of the story. The pressure was immense. I felt the walls of my apartment closing in. I had to get out. I grabbed my keys and drove, ending up, as I always did when the world felt too heavy, on Aunt Helen's doorstep an hour away. She opened the door with a knowing look and a fresh batch of oatmeal cookies in her hand. "I've been expecting you," she said, guiding me to her cozy, cluttered sunroom. "They've put out the bat signal, I see." She handed me her tablet. "You should see this." It was a link to a video Sophie had posted. Tuscany Memories and Welcome Home Barbecue. I pressed play. It was a slickly edited montage set to a soaring, inspirational piano track. There were slow-motion shots of my family laughing under strings of fairy lights at the barbecue, clinking wine glasses against the Tuscan sunset, my father carving a brisket. It was a perfect portrait of a perfect family. But I was gone. Not just absent, but erased. I saw clips from past events, holidays and birthdays where I knew I had been present, but I had been skillfully edited out. A jump cut here, a clever zoom there. In one clip from Christmas 2 years ago, I could hear my own voice off camera, laughing at one of Nate's jokes, but the audio dipped to silence for that exact moment before the music swelled again. I watched the entire 5-minute video. Then I handed the tablet back to Helen, my hands cold. "They're rewriting history," I said, my voice hollow. Helen took the tablet and set it aside. She looked me straight in the eye. "Then it's time you published the original manuscript, Clary." That evening, in the quiet of her guest room, surrounded by the comforting scent of lavender and old books, I found something that gave me the strength to do it. Helen came in holding a dusty, yellowed envelope. "I was going through some of your grandmother's old things," she said gently. "I think she would want you to have this now." The letter was from Grandma Rose, written shortly before she passed away. Her familiar, spidery handwriting filled the page. "My dearest Clara," it began. "I see you, my little anchor. I see how you work so hard to keep everyone afloat. But I want to remind you of something important. An anchor's job is to hold steady, not to be dragged to the bottom. Don't ever let them convince you that your needs are less important than their wants. You are not the background of their story. You are a universe all your own. Don't ever be afraid to shine." Tears, hot and cleansing, finally fell. They weren't tears of sadness, but of recognition. Someone had seen me. I had not been invisible after all. That letter was the permission I needed. I took out my laptop and opened the file named The Record. I attached the bank statements, the invoices, the screenshot of the unauthorized health plan. I attached the audio file of my voice memo, The Truth, Draft 1. And I wrote a short, simple email. Subject: the record as it stands. I sent it to a carefully selected list of people: Aunt Helen, my father's more level-headed brother, and a few older cousins who had always treated me with kindness. I wasn't looking for an army. I was just looking for the truth to have a witness. Then I shut the laptop. I had published my story. Now I had to let it go. The days that followed were quiet. I didn't get an avalanche of responses, but the ones I did get were potent. My uncle called. "Clara," he said, his voice heavy with regret. I had no idea. There's no excuse for what Richard did. "I'm so sorry." A cousin sent an email that said only, "I believe you." We all do. The whispers at the golf club and the book club began to change direction. Aunt Helen reported that my father's bar tab had been mysteriously closed due to unpaid membership dues. My mother canceled her weekly yoga class. Nate's University began sending letters to my parents' house. Sophie's Instagram became a string of vague, inspirational quotes about forgiveness and moving on. I wasn't looking for their downfall. I was simply reclaiming my own ground. My final act was small but significant. I wrote a check for the last outstanding bill that was tied to my name, Sophie's car insurance. I placed it in a plain white envelope. I didn't include a letter, just a single, simple sentence on a slip of paper: "This account is now closed." I drove to their house one last time. The neighborhood looked the same, but I felt different. I was no longer a visitor from a past life. I was a stranger passing through. I slipped the envelope into their mailbox and walked away without looking back. Back in my apartment, I opened a new bank account at a different bank, under my name and my name alone. I got a new phone number. I created new passwords for everything. The silence that followed was no longer empty, it was full. It was the sound of peace. That weekend, I took the beautiful, heavy photo album, the one filled with memories that were not mine to carry, and drove to the small, quiet cemetery where Grandma Rose was buried. I sat on the grass beside her headstone and placed the album against the cool granite. "I can't be the anchor anymore, Grandma," I whispered to the gentle breeze. "Thank you for showing me how to be the ship." I left it there, a story I was no longer responsible for telling. On Sunday, I took a walk in a park downtown. The sun was warm on my skin. I sat on a bench and watched a little girl chase a monarch butterfly across the grass, her laughter a pure, untroubled melody. Her mother watched from a distance, a soft smile on her face. For the first time in my life, I looked at a scene like that and felt no ache, no longing, only a quiet, gentle sense of hope. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just free. And I was finally, completely, the author of my own story.